I don't really have a story.
Mary Johnson, who worked for Stan.
Sorry.
We're with you. It's okay.
He was just a really good guy, and we would go, I visited him, and he was really always Stan. You go in and whether he remembered you or not, even if he didn't know me when I first came in, he then figured out who I was, and we'd have these long conversations, and he was really still Stan at that. He couldn't remember, like David said, if he had breakfast or whatever. But he remembered the company, and he would ask me, we would talk, David talked about his life a lot. With me, it was always the company. And we talked about what buildings we were in, and what office we were in, and who worked for us then, and he'd like, oh, how do you remember all these people? And I'm just like, well, I've been looking at pictures for one thing, and I see a lot of these people in pictures, and I would take in these books that we take from the conference, photos from these conferences. And I say, oh, look at, here's this person and this person, and I don't remember that. And then every once in a while, oh, there's Bill, or, you know, he would recognize some of them, and we'd go. And we would just talk and talk and talk. And he had stories. Towards the end, they became my stories, because I would go and he would ask me about something, and I'd tell him something. I don't remember that. And then he'd say, oh, okay. And we'd talk back and forth. And even when I visited him at Swedish Covenant, it was 1 week ago, his speech was kind of slurred, but he was talking. He didn't know it, and he would tell me stories, and he was talking, and I was talking. The nurse came in, asked him, do you know this person? And he looked at me and kind of shook his head, and I just kind of smiled, and then he's like, she's been here, you don't know who she is? And he says, oh, she's my second in command. So I think he didn't remember my name, and he didn't remember, but he knew he kind of made that connection. And so we talked a little more, and then he said to me, Mary, I'm so glad you come down. It's so good to see you, I'm so glad you come down. Which is like word for word what he has said to me probably for the last 4 years.
I should tell my stories.
Even if he came into the office, you know, not when he was forgetful. He worked for a long time where he was in the office by himself all the time, and so when I came down, he was so happy to have somebody to talk to. And we talk and talk, we go to lunch, and he'd say, again, it's so good to see you, Mary. I'm so glad you came down. Even if it was the day before, and the day before, and the day, he just liked to talk. And I really thought when he went to the Admiral, it would be really good, because there's people there, and he was such a social guy, and that he would talk, and even if it was the same conversations with the same people, but he kind of just stayed in his room. He thought he was at work, and he had things to do, and I'd show up and he'd like, what am I working on? And I'm like, oh, I'm working on the cataloging, because he spent years cataloging Evelyn's work, and he thought that's what he was working on, and I'm like, yeah, I think you're almost done, you just have some final touches, and he's like, yeah, I'll get to it later, and that was fine. And so he was happy in the fact that he thought he was doing, you know, oh, I was looking this up this morning on the internet. Yeah, and so, I don't know. Every time, all my visits were wonderful, so I would miss him a lot. So, Josh, thank you so much for being that guy that took care of things, and just, we knew he was being taken care of, and he was a good guy, he'll be missed.
I have a very unique story. I, like David, was part of the Children's Hour. When we started, I was 27 years old, newly married, never worked downtown, said I would never work downtown, no experience as a secretary. I was out of college, had been, received a teaching degree, couldn't find a job. So I went to work as a translator. And one of the women who worked with us had known Stan at Argonne. And she sort of recruited me. And I was thoroughly intimidated when I met Stan, because he was very friendly, but he said to me, what do you know about math? And I said, well, not a whole lot. What do you know about Spanish? So that's how it started. And the one thing I have to say, I met wonderful people through Stan. Stan was always the most genuine, friendly man I've ever met outside of my husband. But the thing that's unique about my story is like David, we were pretty green. We really didn't, I really didn't know what I was doing. And Sandy, Jack's wife, was working with Jack, and Jean, the lady from Argonne, we were all together and just having a lot of fun, learning a lot. But it was a very interesting experience because it was, it was the beginning of the software, the big software boom. And I actually left, I only worked for Stan for about 3 years. I became pregnant, and I thought I would go back to work, but I've always lived way out in the western suburbs, and it wasn't a really viable. We made a big decision that one of us had to be home. And anyway, as the years went by, I didn't really see a whole lot of Stan. We'd always get a Christmas card. He would occasionally call, and then we got transferred to Pittsburgh and kind of lost touch. And we were there 3 years. It seems to be a 3-year thing. Anyway, when we came back, Stan called on the Thanksgiving weekend and said, "Hi, do you remember me?" And Stan had the most, I know most of you know, the softest voice. He always had this very soft, and I said, yeah, I said, what's going on? And by this time he was at the Santa Fe building, and the company had grown, and he was ready to downsize, I think, and wanted to have, or maybe he had already downsized, I can't remember exactly. But anyway, he was having a Christmas party for former employees, and he was trying to get everybody to come. And that was the year my son was the star of the piano recital. And it was a snowy, awful, so I never went. But he continued to call. He had downsized because he continued to call. And finally one time I said, he called, he was like calling weekly, and I finally said, "Stan, what do you really want?" And he said, "I kind of need help." And so I went down there, Ed and I, my husband and I went down there and had lunch with him, and I walked in the door, and this is the part that doesn't happen to most people. I walked in the door and we picked up where we left off. He always had this incredible wit about if you screwed up, and you'd say, "Ooh," he'd say, "You're fired." And I'd always say, "Good, I'm going home." And he'd go, "No, no, no." And it was the same scene over and over. And but anyway, the way it went was, we went down there, had lunch, and my husband said, "This is not gonna be worthwhile. It was a long trip. I live way out. I live 40 miles west of the city." And so I said, "Well, he really needs help, and we'll just, I'll do this for a month." 16 years later, I was still doing, I only went in 1 day a week because I had kids and whatever, but it became, that's the thing about Stan. He just was the kind of person that you could feel comfortable with. And like I said, we literally picked up where we left off. It was the same relationship, only now I had kids. And he would invite us every year, when my kids were in college, every year he and Evelyn would invite my kids to come have lunch. And he was just a very genuine human being. And I had a really hard time when he started to fail. I looked at him, and I could only remember what he used to be. And we lost our parents, Ed and I lost our parents at very young ages. And so to me, Stan was kind of like a father figure, and he was sort of like a grandfather figure for my kids. My kids, at least, we don't have a big family. My kids at least got the opportunity to be around older people, and so, and I'm really grateful for the people that I met. And the other thing was, when I came back, David wasn't really super involved in the company, but David was still there. Jack was still there. Malcolm, McCaleb, all the people that we had started out with were the same people. This was 18 years that I was away, came back, and it was the same people. That doesn't happen. So I think, you know, I think it's, I'm glad he's at peace, and I'm glad, what he always said to me was, he always wished Evelyn would go first, so, you know, to me, Stan got two of his wishes, to go very peacefully and have Evelyn go before him, you know.